I didn't say my favorite moment because there was an ice cream truck parked outside the front of my house.
Okay.
And it was just like playing the song on loop. I'm like, I can't turn my mic on.
Well, if you had a kind of horrible moment in the show, that would have been a nice juxtaposition with the ice cream truck.
All right, well then we'll leave
Right.
the latter part with what's your moment, Lindsey?
Well, for me, it's all the mother-daughter moments, but I really particularly love the Janine moment where she is with her child when she's sick, and how the power of the mother and child together heals the baby. And I just think that there's such powerful storylines about the role of mother and child in the story, and the fact that they just blow that whole idea up with this show. And they, so that's for me. I love that episode.
So here's an interesting question on the mother thing. So I don't want to blow anything, but in the last episode of this season that we've just seen, the bombshell's been dropped with respect to Serena Joy. Pregnant. Do y'all think that's going to change her very much?
I think so.
The big question I had was, will she give up on Nicole? Right? She doesn't need Nicole anymore.
Right.
What does that mean for her testimony?
But Nicole might be Fred's daughter.
Oh yeah, I think that's the implication.
Ooh, I didn't consider that.
I think
particular issue.
Yeah.
So
because if
yeah.
Serena Joy can be pregnant and she's, to a best of our knowledge, only had sex with Fred, that means it's not all him.
Yeah, we could get a role reversal on those two with regard to their views on Nicole. Serena might lose some interest in Nicole, while Fred takes a bit more interest because the kid might be his.
I think it's going to be fascinating to watch how the obvious fight dynamic they've depicted with those two being pitted against each other, and once he finds that out, how that switches.
And the motherhood theme is interesting from the question that came across in the chat, but we didn't really want to talk about at the beginning of the panel because it was a spoiler, with June's sort of mentoring of Mrs. Keys to get her to murder this commander who has raped her.
Yeah, for the viewers, the one I didn't read, that Wizard accidentally let everybody see the question, was from Adrian O.D. Mark. So maybe those are letters, or maybe it's Adrian Oddmark. Spoiler alert, what are your thoughts on June pushing Mrs. Keys, little McKenna Grace, although she aged a lot since the last time we saw her, her pushing Mrs. Keys into murder?
But she didn't, though, because like the first thing that Mrs. Keys says to June
Esther?
is, we're gonna.
Is Esther her name? Yeah.
Esther. Yeah. We're gonna kill people. Like, God told me we're gonna kill people. You're gonna help me kill people, right? Like this whole time she's been badgering her of like, help me kill people. So I really don't think she actually pushed her. She just gave her permission.
Except there's
I agree.
There's that line of "make me proud," right? And that mentoring, that sort of training component to all of this, it does shift the dynamic. And she puts the knife in her hand.
Right.
Right.
The implication is, you want my approval, you want my love, you better do this, right? Yep. So it's absolute corruption, in my opinion.
I think it upped it, but I think that she also forced June into that situation by letting her know at the introduction to their first conversation that if June wasn't going to play the violence game and what she expected and rescue her from her trauma by killing these men that hurt her, which we find out later. So I'm combining some plot points here, but once it becomes clear what her motivation is to strike back at the men that hurt her, and she wants violence to answer that retribution. I don't know that June did anything other than survive the situation she had to, because I think June interpreted that if she doesn't play ball with her the way she wants, then she is now a threat.
What I think when she uses a phrase, make me proud, she's admitting the hierarchical nature of their relationship, right? And she's using it to advantage to get what what she wants. I'm not going to say right or wrong on it. What I'm going to say is all identities are relational. And in that particular moment, I think June could say to herself, I can get what I want. You can get what you want. At least it's what you tell me you want. You respect me. You're looking to me for affirmation. So I'm going to wrap it up in a bow for you. Tell you that I'll be proud if this is how it turns out. I mean, that happens in all relationships all the time when people recognize that others respect them. Yeah.
We see June. I think what's interesting for me is watching particularly this season is Elizabeth Moss goes through this scene where she is letting us know that she is dissociating. She is finding a different place in her mind to get through whatever she is about to have to do. And we see her switch into that before she gives her that knife. Because remember, she also has to take that knife from her earlier in the episode.
So it could be seen as her returning that knife to her, as an actual returning that piece of power to her.
Right.
Or her making sure in Esther's mind, I'm the person who's giving you this power.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the one in the higher part of this particular hierarchy in this moment.
Can't forget that she was poisoning. She was poisoning.
Yeah, she's already been working on the murdering, but not quite up to full-fledged murder. And it's like, let's just kind of kill him a little bit along the way to keep him under control.
The thing that I was going to say was just in awe of Elizabeth Moss and the acting throughout, but like in these last 3 episodes, especially in that episode where she's still like infected, like really, if it's yellow pussing, like she's not okay. And now she has to be this like leader, and she's exhausted and she's semi-dissociating pretty much at all times. And now she has to like manage this young girl who through her own complex trauma is not okay either. It's just a beautiful job.
We got a lot of characters we didn't really get to talk about. So I mean, I don't remember us even mentioning Emily this whole time.
Oh, and
I love Emily. There are whole long stretches where she was my favorite character.
I think she is my favorite character. I think Emily's amazing. She is so complex and so interesting. And I mean, she's a badass. This is a woman who finally just said, enough, done. I'm done. And I'm going to stab Aunt Lydia in the back and push her down the stairs. And I'm going to run over those soldiers because none of this is okay. She is such a fascinating character. I think she's awesome.
She did the same thing so many horror movie heroes do, is by failing to make sure that bad guy's dead. It's like,
double tap.
No, pick it up, stab her again. Come on. I'm sorry.
Lydia can't die. Lydia's too important. She can't die.
If she does die, that will be one thing that tells us, okay, they're definitely not heading to the sequel. How many of you know what happens in the sequel?
In the Testaments?
Yeah, in the Testaments.
Yeah, I've read it.
Okay, roughly half of us know what happens in the Testaments. You know, because that's like 15 years later, and its 3 main characters are Lydia, Nicole, and Hannah.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the characters of it. And now there were moments in this season where I'm wondering, you can't help but think, are they playing with how Lydia's heading in that direction or not? It seems like she's definitely not involved in Mayday now, but there could be some of the things that are inspiring her to head that direction. We don't know. And I don't guess we should go too much into what happens in the book because
everyone should read it. It's really good.
Yeah, read it. It's odds are Hulu's got the right to the Handmaid's Tale, but not the Testament, so they'll do whatever they're going to do. But they might choose to do it in a way that the Testaments may or may not happen later.
I'd be really fascinated to hear what you guys think about Janine, because I think that she's one of my favorite characters, and she starts out kind of in the flashbacks, and when she gets to the Red Center, as being this sort of, kind of badass, right? Like she's anti-authority. She fights back against people, and she seems to have like a number done on her by Gilead. And even to where she gets to becoming sort of in a leadership role toward this last episode. She's constantly transforming. So from a psychological perspective, this is selfish, but I'd love to hear what you guys think of her.
An audience watching a TV show point of view, she brings in these humorous moments that just break the tension. So I really appreciate her humor. In the new season, there's a moment where, June is going to go off and fight the fight, and she says like "Red leader standing by," So it's this totally hilarious Star Wars reference. But she is fascinating because she kind of goes crazy, but she's still confident in a really admirable way. When they're talking about we're going to have to do a bunch of really scary things, she says, "I'm brave," right? Like she's very much about being authentic, and I appreciate that about her.
Yeah, and I think of all the characters they've introduced, she's the one who seems as if she hadn't really bought into any macro parts of the old world anyway. She just has this, I want to say, complex nature. We all have a complex nature, but she seems just authentically, as you said, to just go where she wants in terms of who she is and what she does. And it doesn't surprise me that the character like that then, in this world of just big constraint, big violent constraint, sort of ends up being a leader in the sense of now there's a reason for me to be one. Now there's a reason for me to be this. And it's not like she was saying earlier, I'm not going to come over. It's just that was part of her essence. And it doesn't surprise me that that kind of person, once they're really in a constraining space, sort of goes through the various deconstructions and reorganizations that she has. And the fact that she survived yet carries the past with her, basically in how she looks as well, is a really stunning character. And I would put her, if I have a favorite, I just don't experience the show, it can't that way, but this is one of the more interesting examinations of a person. Yeah.
It's fascinating to me that she had trauma before Gilead. Like it's clear. I mean, they mentioned it, she was gang raped and survived it. And so for me, Janine has the same survival instinct that really is at her core that June has. That's why I think the two of them are so well matched, and why they both come out of the end of the third episode in season 4.
Yeah, she survives by disconnecting herself emotionally from some of the horrors that she goes through. That's why she's able to say the funny things at times when nobody else is going to, and why she's able to laugh at times when nobody else will, and to maintain hope of things that, regardless of how hopeless something might seem. Ben, what did you have?
I was just say, I just enjoy like watching the way that her, like Scott said, the deconstruction is played. At one point in time, I was in Army ROTC and wasn't able to pass medical, so I didn't go that route with my life, but was learning about how soldiers are trained and learning about how we go through this process where in order to find yourself within this new culture and define yourself in it, you have to first deconstruct what you thought about yourself and the old world and who you were in it. And we see her go through that several times. Yep. Where she's first brought down in her own life by all the bad things that happened to her, I think are mostly alluded to, but then we see her and what Gilead does to her to break her down in the Red Center and stamp her spirit out. But then she starts finding herself and defining herself in this role as mom and finding strength in that. And when that's taken away, she breaks down again and then reformats herself into this version that we see now that is becoming, the firm number 2, the emotional leadership as opposed to the tactical leadership provided by June of this group. And she's their spirit. And I think it's amazing to watch how she is broken down and reforms and then finds an identity. And once she finds that identity, latches on, and that becomes her everything, because everything else has been taken from her except that.
I'm curious about what Erin has to say, because I know that you were interested, I think, when you first started talking about toxic masculinity, and I'm very curious. We haven't really talked very much about the male characters in this show. Fred and Nick and Luke all have such different, interesting, complex roles, and I'm very curious again, really among all of you, about your take on the treatment of men in this show.
Yeah, do we still like Nick or not?
I really wanted to bring up Nick. But I also know that Scott, that fragile masculinity was something that you wanted to touch on. So so my little take on this that I wanted to do was this idea of Nick and this whole "I love you" thing. Okay, yeah. So I'm still having feels about that. But it to me really does show what I often see in society, which is like this ability to perpetrate so many horrors and abuses against women and constrictions and oppressions and all of this kind of stuff, and yet still be able to go home at the end of the day and say, I love you. You know, this idea that we have to have these like anti-rape movements where the only way we can like reach men, and I'm not saying that this is true, I'm not saying that I actually believe that, but the idea is the only way we can reach men is be like, well, what if it was your daughter? I'm like, well, why should I have to be your daughter to be human? And so it's this idea of like, how do you dehumanize? Like, because he's still doing it, he's still fighting. Like we saw him at the very beginning, kind of as a pseudo incel kind of thing, like this guy who was not okay with him not being able to be a big, strong, manly man in society kind of thing. If my memory serves, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a minute. And then he's given this power, and so he's still wanting to hold this power, which requires him to systemically abuse all of these women in the same role of the woman he loves, and yet he still has this idea that he loves her and that she's changed him. So
it's his idea to bring in Hannah as blackmail at the end. He's the one who came up with that brilliant plan.
He's the one.
Sorry, Scott.
No, I was going to say identity is always dialectical, right? In other words, we do and all the time. I love the end of season 3 when the Commander Joseph is talking to June about you can't go now. And she says, what? He says, you can't go now. And they've had this relationship that is clearly somewhat egalitarian. And then when she won't do what he says, you see him collapse into his role and say, this is my house, right? And this is what you always see happen to people that are in what I would call unchecked power positions, where their emotions have not been connected in their life to understanding the power position they hold. And so since they live in a world of unconscious authority, unconscious power, they're pretty fragile when it's challenged, because, you know, like you talk about the characters who've been deconstructed, reconstructed, we call that scrappiness, right? These are people who have been challenged and have reorganized themselves in the face of that challenge. Some of the men in the show, most of them, are just in positions where they've never had to have their identity checked. They've never been pressured. And I think that actually makes their identities rather fragile, in the sense they have no complexity to fall back onto when they're challenged. And I think they depicted that very well in all of these male characters. And then when you put people in these destable states, these unstable states, that's when you're more likely to get these binary atrocities, right? When you just offer them goodness, you just offer them the beautiful future, it resolves their dissonance, and then the next day they'll go to the other side. I mean, so I think they handled the maleness in the show extremely well, and yeah, I'm thrilled.
I love that moment when June takes that power right back from what he's trying to exert, and with the condescending way she says to him, you think this is still your house?
You really think this is your house? I love it. It's just, and it's so clear at that moment that she's actually beyond him, right? He probably had this sort of white male savior vibe on himself, or he was helping her because he had the power and he was bigger and better because of it. And he got a lesson in power, right there in that moment. And I thought, okay, that's good writing. He's been deconstructed. She's in charge and didn't really have to say it, which is when I really dig on the writing.
And it's one of there are many subtle things they do with filmmaking in this, like in that moment when that camera is looking a little bit up at her.
Mhm.
You had something, Ben?
No, I was gonna say with Nick. With Nick, I think what's so fascinating about him is I don't think he even is fully bought into that culture, because remember that it didn't happen long. I think it was just one episode where we saw his history and we saw him being mentored at the start of this movement by one of those commanders, and was he working kind of as a porter at a car dealership, and he gets fired.
Yeah, something. Like that.
And he was working on unemployment, right? Yeah, and he's doing menial jobs and trying to survive, and then this commander starts mentoring him and showing him the way into this religion, and he starts assigning value by, if I play this role, then I can gain this power. And I think we see that playing out with him, and he's still not on Team Gilead. He's on Team Nick, and he's playing the role of being on Team Gilead as long as that suits him, but he wants what he wants. And I think that he's one of those who would flip sides, like Scott is talking about. Like, he would flip sides when it suits him, and he does, because he could get June to give them what they want and get into a place where he doesn't have to keep her alive. But he doesn't. He chooses to manipulate his power to keep her alive because he wants to.
I think there's a theme of lack of empathy from some of the male characters in the show as well. And so when Nick is assigned a wife, he treats her horribly, which inevitably leads to her death. And even Luke, who's admirable in lots and lots of ways, Luke, in a flashback, June is upset because they've just taken the money out of her bank account and assigned it to Luke. And she's really upset about this. And he's like, what's the big deal? I'll take care of you. And the lack of understanding, you've just had your wife's independence taken away and it doesn't really seem to bother you. I think that's one of the brilliant parts of the writing of the show.
What about the last episode with Luke, where he's having that whole conversation as he's holding baby Nicole, and he says, how could she choose not to ever see me again? Like, I was really kind of shocked by where that went, because I was like, I'm thinking, okay, he's having survivor's guilt. He's feeling bad that he's, in Canada and he can't do anything to help her. But then it went to this whole place where he was like, she wouldn't choose never to see me again. It was so self-centered position. And I was like, wow. So I even was thinking and questioning his character at that point as well.
There's a lot of that kind of delusion, though. When Fred takes June to Jezebel's, and at some point or another, when she's distracted, says, well, aren't you having a good time? I mean,
that thing that confuses, like, how the hell can you ask her how she feels now? What I love about this show, and the people to watch out for in life are the people that don't know who they are. What I mean by that is some of these characters don't know who they are because they're so destabilized because of the trauma their lives are actually generating in the lives of others. They buy into these bogus narratives on the one side, and they can actually feel those things completely in that moment. And they are in a space that they believe that's dialectic to the other self they'll have tomorrow when they empathize with all that trauma. And that ability to do that is it's the side effect of how brains work. If we want to go that way, it's an inherently unstable system, and it can just reorganize itself globally very quickly. And when the context is affording you this, that's what you are. When it's affording you that, that's what you are. And you either give empathy or you deny it. I think for me, like I said, we enter moments emotionally first, I believe. And then we either take on the suffering of others, or we have a rhetoric that justifies ignoring it. And I think that's why you would see these characters be brutal in one scene and then empathetic in another, because what they're doing in the brutal scene is disconnecting their empathy. And that's when they're using dehumanizing language. That's when they're doing all of that stuff. But it's pretty scary that that's possible within us to be those different things.
One thing I want to bring up along those lines is the relationship between Fred and Serena Joy, because you see them throughout as they're kind of throughout the show, they're trying to show you what happened to get us where we are. And you saw like all those moments where Serena was, like you mentioned earlier, the architect of all of this kind of stuff. And Fred was kind of like the guy who's supporting her and all of this kind of bit. And then you see them go back and forth, be the person to like goad the other. And Serena definitely, especially after the explosion, when he was injured, and he was all like, what are we gonna do? I don't know what to do. And she's like, you're gonna, like, sorry to use this language, but you're gonna sack up and do it. You know, she called him out. She questioned his man card. She asked for a revocation, unless he come in and kind of be the man that she needed him to be to continue this Gilead kind of piece. And then so I really like it. I don't remember if it was the third episode or the second episode where they are having this back and forth where they're just kind of blaming each other of like, you know, no, it was you kind of piece. So I really like the gender dynamics and in there as well.
That's a hard character. That's a hard character to have in this show, where so many women are being traumatized. To have a woman be in a position of power who seems to be complicit, hard character to write, hard character to act. I have a lot of respect for how they've handled it. And it's interesting, I haven't seen the arguing scene, but I can imagine that they're actually explaining each other rather well, right? That they're both telling the truth about the other. And that mishmash that mishmash is who they both are. It reveals who they've both been ignoring. And so I look forward to seeing it, but I thought that was a bold character to put in the show, and I thought that they handled it well.
From what I gather from those who've seen 8 of the episodes this season already, is that we're going to see a whole lot of scenes like that between Fred and Serena Joy, you know, through about episode 7. Apparently episode 8 is the one where you'll really have a sense of future moving action. Maura, we haven't hit on Maura. She's been mentioned, but we haven't really had anything to say about her yet. I think everybody understands some of the choices Moira's had to make.
I actually respond to her more than any other character in terms of, I think had I been in those exact situations, I would have made every single choice that she makes. And that's sort of admitting sometimes those are not the brave choice. Sometimes those are the survivor choice. I can respond to her choices more than any other character, actually. And one thing I like about the TV version of Handmaids as opposed to the book is that there's a difference in how they treat race. So in the original book, all of the handmaids were white, and there was sort of this idea that all of the people in charge of the government only wanted white kids, basically. So it's interesting that they've added some racial diversity to the show, because in some ways I like that we're seeing the representation, but I also think it's interesting that Atwood's original vision was including some white supremacy.
Yeah, I think logically there would be a lot of white supremacy to such people, and it is still a very white show.
True.
Yeah.
Including some non-white characters, actually, including black. You don't even see much of other races.
Right.
Including black and or Hispanic, but especially black, if that kind of makes it easier to avoid talking about race at all. Because if they go all white, then you are getting into the fact that what did they do with everybody else? Having a few in there kind of makes it easier to avoid talking about what have they done with the non-whites.
There's another black handmaid later in the show who is the one who's kind of complicit with everything, and she sort of told herself, I'm in a better situation, and she really only gets upset when it's her third child that she's having, and and so they do have a couple of people you can sort of see representing different perspectives, but you're right that it's still mostly white.
Yeah, and that her demise too. Ultimately, you know, she goes through all of that. She goes through all of that sort of bullying, really,
Right.
from the other handmaids. When it turns out that, you know, it comes out that she had actually sort of ratted out the others. She goes through all that bullying, and then she just loses it, and ends up, you know, being this just sort of vessel, right? And the fact that I don't know necessarily what that says about how race is treated in the show, because arguably it could have been anybody, ultimately, who took that particular path. But it was a very interesting choice.
Because I can easily see somebody looking at our panel right now and saying, who are these 7 white people to be saying this? Asher, who wanted to be on our panel, and really my reason for telling him he was the one that, if we have more women, maybe, was because he's done more of these than any of y'all have done. And Brittany, we have Brittany and Brittany, if you can hear the difference in what I'm saying. Brittany is traveling. She really wanted to do this topic with us. And if we revisit it, like at the end of the season, she said she wants to be in there. So somebody say, well, why don't you wait to talk about race then? You know, that's a legitimate question. It is one where all of us, we all have to check our own privilege. We have to be conscious of these things. And then it becomes an awkward conversation.
I think I would love to hear the writers answer that question. And what I mean is, you know, Wind just pretty much explained to me why you would have a white cast if you go back to the source material, because this is white supremacy all the way down to genetics, right?
Right.
I haven't heard anybody say that kind of thing in the show. So I'm interested what kind of choices the writers were making, because I'm sure they were conscious. What kind of issues, values were they sorting through when they decided how to cast the show? And that's not me being accusatory. That's me being interested in the kind of ways people mesh different dimensions together when they try to create something. Because there's a whole nother season if we ask what happened to non-whites. I mean, if it's that binary, and that there's a whole nother season, there's a whole nother lifetime, right, of what happened to non-whites. And I'm not sure they can go there now, but those are decisions they made. And I'm not trying to make them answer for it. It's just, I found myself a wee tad confused, particularly given the source material.
Oh, no, I was gonna say it's an interesting blend to do between matching source material and reaching a point where you're trying to be representative and at the same time break all the stereotypes that have been plaguing Hollywood for so long, where the only way to do that is to include actors of all the various types of human beings that exist. And, you know, I would be curious to hear how they ration through that too, because, you know, the only way to break that down is to go, well, the source material said this, but it doesn't fundamentally change the story enough that we should continue to perpetuate over whiteness of Hollywood, and that we can, you know, address this in our writing and break down this stereotype to be inclusive, because the world is not a white world as much as, you know, the United States wants to be or tries to be in some people's minds. But the world is a diverse intersection of everyone that's here. And I appreciate when they take the opportunities to go, you know what, let's break that down and let's not perpetuate that.
In Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling was much more open to changing races or specifying races, because she did point out she never said what race Hermione was. And in the play about the cursed child, Hermione was cast as black. I guess African English, African British, they African British, and she said she never said what race Hermione was, so she was more open to some of the changes as opposed to Twilight, where the author absolutely opposed changing races in order to increase diversity, and these are still both very white stories, but this one is specifically. I do think the show has kind of dodged the question. I honestly would love to see a separate show showing the rest of the world dealing with America.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we saw The Ambassador. That was the most cosmopolitan sort of perspective that we saw. The thing about it, this story is about white male supremacy. It's about toxic masculinity and white supremacy.
So it's implicitly there. Have we seen any black men in power in Gilead?
Wasn't there one?
There was, that one, and he had a wife, right?
Yeah.
There was one in one episode.
Yeah, it was like one episode, seriously. Because I remember thinking,
One
oh,
scene.
there is one. Yeah.
It was just like one scene too. It was like one episode, one scene.
And Nick is Latino, right?
One line where they actually address the issue of race in The Handmaids, where the aunts are sitting in a room and they've got like a turntable of files for handmaids, and they're assigning handmaids to commanders. And Aunt Lydia says, well, we can't give her to that commander because he doesn't want a handmaid of color. And they're like, and then they just keep talking about it.
Okay.
So
right.
I do wish that it were more explicit in the show. What is the situation in Gilead in terms of racism and white supremacy? I wish that they would provide it more explicitly.
This is, they chose to focus heavily on the gender dynamics and reduce attention to some of the other logical complexities, because the show's complicated heavily as it is. They make plenty of characters religious, not to show it's not just about those running Gilead and their religious views. They're not saying religion itself is the problem, because you have plenty of other characters praying. I think the lives they live, they either pray a lot or be adamantly nope.
And they don't shy away from LGBTQ issues, right? So it seems like it is a choice that they're making.
Are there any gay male characters?
Wasn't the commander from Washington, D.C. hinted at as being gay?
Yes, he did kind of hit on Fred a little bit.
Yes.
That's right.
And he
It
goes
was subtle.
straight to, so you don't know.
Yeah.
But I remember there was also a comment that if Nick didn't actually sleep with Eden,
Right.
that it was going to appear as though he was a gender traitor.
Mhm.
And so there was pressure that he had to do that.
And that very phrase is homophobic, right? I mean,
Right.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And very
Well,
early
and
in the show, on the wall, they have the pink, someone with the hood with the pink triangle, right?
So somebody was hanged for being gay.
Well,
Yeah.
Emily's
When they hanged Emily's lover.
no, her. Well,
They
yes,
did.
but I was thinking also her boss, her dean.
Yeah.
Who she was. Remember, he was gay and he was hanged, and I believe they'd spray painted a word over him. The
Even
emperor.
without it, you knew that's why they hanged him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, clearly it's they tolerate the existence of the fertile gay woman.
Yeah.
And those who aren't, or those who are older, are seen as not just expendable, but something to destroy.
Mhm.
Okay.
Because they killed the Martha, who is gay. But they didn't, her lover. They didn't kill Emily.
Mhm.
They just removed her
Right.
clitoris.
That was brutal.
Mm.
When she stands up,
Yeah.
you see that patch and realize what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
You got something, Ben?
No, other than that was horrid.
Oh,
Like watching her, I know I didn't have anything like comment on that. Just, that was horrible.
where do we see hope?
some countries where they
Yeah.
do that surgery on women to control their sexuality.
Yeah, it's real. And it happens far more often in the world than most people realize. I mean, its existence is known, but it's still not something people talk about a lot because, well, you don't think of that in our society. Well, it can happen anywhere. Where do we see hope in these stories? And I think the reason for watching it is that there's always hope, even if it's hard to find.
For me, I see hope in the resilience, in the fact that just when you think June is broken, or any character is completely broken, and how do you come back from that? There's a rallying moment. And if I can use the metaphor of the last scene of the third episode in this season, there's another side to the tracks, right? And inevitably they somehow manage to get there. So I think there's hope in the resilience in the face of all of this awful.
I think there's hope in the gradual, what we've seen is the gradual destabilization of Gilead, right? I mean, they got 53 kids out, or whatever the number was.
86.
86, I'm sorry. I think, yeah. So, I mean, that didn't happen in season 1, didn't happen in season 2. So the ability to reorganize how this, or bring this place down is on the rise. And it usually plays out gradually like that. How many seasons are going to work it, we'll see. But
well, I think that seeing the 86 kids as opposed to the 52, right, that they expected, shows that the resistance is wider spread than they anticipated, right?
Exactly.
So there's hope in that, right? That they're, it doesn't, when you're in your little bubble, you don't realize that there are other people fighting back elsewhere, in their bubbles as well. And so if they can just coordinate that, there's hope, right? That they can bring it down.
And once that story becomes part of the narrative that they actually got out, then that just changes the place people are in. You assume that's going to have an impact on everyone else. I mean, there's a lot of clamping down, of course, that's going to go on. But
they do talk a lot, like you said, about like people all over the place doing things, cutting the cable and bombing things. And so, yeah. And so I think one of the things that gave me hope was when June got the Jezebel to go along with things, and the old Alice Walker quote, "We are the ones we have been waiting for," kind of thing. I thought was a beautiful moment. And which means that even if June does get captured, that it's spreading.
mm-hmm.
I think that's really powerful to see, is watching it spread. And I think that something I picked up on, maybe it's my inherent Star Wars nerddom, but I picked up there was not just one, but two A New Hope references in these episodes. And the one was very blatant when the redheaded girl, I forgot her name, just left my mind. But when Janine, thank you. When Janine says "Red Leader standing by," but also when we see June very clearly mimicked Princess Leia when she said they're in the library. It was very much they're on Dantooine. They're on Dantooine. And I think that they're trying to reference for us that what we're seeing is we're seeing the revolution build. We're seeing people not give up. We're seeing people join the rallying cry. And hopefully, somewhere in this 10-year run, we see them blow up their Death Star, and maybe the second one too. But I am really moved by watching the growth of the movement and watching it spread as word goes to word. And then June telling the one girl at the fantasy place that it's not an army, it's us. And then she joins.
I love seeing them run.
Yeah.
Even though that train took out 3 of them?
Did it?
Yep.
It kind of looks like it.
Well, because that
one got shot.
Yeah, and that shot afterwards, you see from the distance, you see the one who got shot lying there, Yeah, there was a shot for a moment just counting them. I thought maybe a second one got shot, but then I just see the one body lying there from the distant shot at the very end, which means like, did that train get 3 of them?
There's two on each side of the train, and then, but I think that means that 2 of them did get.
I think it was
there's one I couldn't tell if she'd gotten
Adriana?
shot, or I only saw one lying
You
there.
need to take out like through various and many means. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And well,
Just
because that's the price of June and Janine getting away. And other people are conscious of the fact that people get hurt for helping the resistance, for helping June, who's now their face of handmade resistance. But I'm glad to see her getting away. How many times can we watch June escape?
I can watch it every single episode. I'm fine with it.
My daughter-in-law gave up on the show after 1/3 of one season is about June's escape that abruptly ends. Because it felt to her like, oh, they're going to just keep returning to the status quo to make sure she keeps winding up being a handmaid again. And I'm kind of concerned. It's like, on the one hand, I don't want June to be put in that red outfit again. But okay, so what is she going to be, rebel leader for the next 6 years?
I did ask myself after finishing the 3 episodes, like, how much more can she take? I mean, she did almost break at the end of that episode. She asked Lydia to die, right? And so how much longer can they continue to torture her? I don't know.
I couldn't decide though if she was manipulating Lydia in that moment though. When I was watching that, I thought, is she being serious or is she manipulating Lydia to be kind?
So, all right. Well, on that, I'll let y'all go, and Wednesday night we'll see where June heads next.
All right.
Of course, people
Sounds
watching
good.
this next week may already know. So, bye.
Yeah, so nice to meet